that CDA, or Critical Discourse Analysis, studies language and other semiotic systems we use every day. It's not just about words, but about uncovering the hidden, opaque, and often invisible structures of power, dominance, discrimination, and control that are embedded within language. The main goal here is to critically examine how social inequalities are constructed, maintained, and challenged through our modes of communication. We look at how language can reinforce or resist these inequalities, and how they are legitimized or questioned in society. It's important to note that CDA is inherently interdisciplinary. This means it often requires combining different fields, methods, and approaches to really understand complex social phenomena. It's not tied to one single theory or method, but instead offers a range of approaches, each using various theoretical models and research agendas. So, in essence, CDA helps us see beyond the surface of language, revealing the power dynamics and social structures that shape our interactions and perceptions. It's a powerful tool to critically analyze how language both reflects and influences social realities, aligning perfectly with our overall theme of understanding the deeper layers of communication and social power. Let's take a closer look at CDA's perspective on discourse. Essentially, CDA sees language use in speech and writing as more than just communication. It's a form of social practice. That means our language choices are deeply embedded in social contexts and practices. Discourse, in this view, is part of larger systems through which people actively construct their social identities and realities. So, everything from the way we speak or write helps shape who we are and how society perceives us. Now, an important idea here is the concept of a discursive event. Think of it as any instance of talk or text that occurs within a specific situation. This event doesn't happen in a vacuum. It has a dialectical relationship with its surrounding context, including the situation itself, the institutions involved, and the broader social structures. It's a two-way relationship. The context influences the discourse, but that discourse also influences the context and structures over time. And this leads us to the idea that discourse is not just conditioned by society. It also plays a constitutive role. It helps create social realities, shape objects of knowledge, and define social identities and relationships between people and groups. So, language is active. It's shaping social life as much as it reflects it. All of this ties back to the overall theme that language and social practice are deeply intertwined, constantly influencing and constructing our social world. The critical impetus in CDA, or Critical Discourse Analysis, is really about producing and conveying critical knowledge that helps us understand power structures in society. When we say critical, we're talking about an approach that recognizes how discourse is shaped by the social world, and in turn, how discourse can influence social realities. It's a two-way relationship. The goal of critique here is to uncover and reveal the underlying structures of power and to unmask the ideologies that often go unnoticed. Power is a central concept in CDA. It's often defined as the ability to impose one's will on others, which can manifest in many ways within language and social interactions. CDA specifically focuses on social domination. That is, the abuse of power by one group over another. It's important to note that power doesn't usually come straight from language itself. Rather, language can be a tool to challenge, subvert, or change those power dynamics. When we talk about the essence of critique, what we're really doing is examining how language functions in the context of power relations, exposing inequalities, and questioning dominant ideologies. This approach encourages us to see beyond the surface of communication and understand the deeper social implications. So, in summary, CDA isn't just about analyzing language for its own sake. It's about understanding how language relates to power and social change. Let's start by looking at the first point on the slide, power in discourse. This idea emphasizes that discourse, whether it's face-to-face conversations or mass media, actually serves as a space where power relations are exercised and enacted. It's not just about words or communication for their own sake. It's about how certain discourses can reinforce or challenge existing power structures. Now moving to the second point, power behind discourse. Here, we're shifting our focus a bit. It's not just about what happens in conversations or media, but also about the underlying orders of discourse. These are networks of conventions. Think of them as the rules and norms that shape how discourse is structured. And importantly, these are themselves shaped by relations of power at the institutional or societal level. This is where Foucault comes in. He's often called a godfather of critical discourse analysis. Foucault saw power as a systemic and constitutive part of society. It's not just something that a few people hold. It's woven into the fabric of social institutions and practices. He introduced the idea of technologies of power, like discipline, which are techniques or strategies used to control and normalize behavior. And one of the most fascinating aspects of power, according to Foucault, and central to CDA, is that power often remains invisible. It's not always overt or obvious. That's why CDA aims to uncover and investigate how this invisible power manifests linguistically, through language patterns, choices, and structures. So, in summary, when we talk about power in discourse, we're exploring how language acts as a vehicle for power, both in direct interactions and through the broader, often hidden, societal mechanisms that shape discourse itself. Let's explore why texts are often sites of struggle. They tend to show traces of different discourses and ideologies, which are constantly competing for dominance. These discourses are rarely completely cohesive, which actually creates space where social actors can step in and influence the discourse, working towards change that benefits their interests. It's important to understand that contradictory discourses are relational elements. They coexist and circulate within a field of force relations, and sometimes strategies shift from one to an opposing one. This dynamic nature keeps the struggle ongoing. Critical Discourse Analysis, or CDA, is particularly interested in how groups that are dominated can resist power abuse through discourse. It helps uncover how power is maintained and how it can be challenged. CDA can also empower people to break free from the negative effects of dominance that are revealed through analysis. So, in essence, discourse is a site of struggle, where different interests, ideologies, and power relations clash and evolve. Recognizing this helps us see how language shapes social realities and how change can be initiated within these struggles. On this slide, I want to highlight the practical aim of CDA and CDS, which is to uncover the discursive means of mental control and social influence. Essentially, we're looking at how language and discourse shape power dynamics and influence social behavior. At the same time, CDA studies also strive to support groups that are dominated or marginalized. The goal here is to develop a broader perspective of solidarity with these groups, helping them to challenge and resist their subjugation. This often involves creating strategic proposals aimed at assessing and developing what we call counterpower and counter-ideologies. In other words, it's about constructing alternative narratives and discourses that can challenge dominant ones. For groups seeking emancipation, such as women, changing the balance of discursive power means gaining control over the dominant discourses themselves. This is a crucial point. Power in discourse is something that must be seized, not just passively accepted. Finally, sustainable resistance depends on individuals and communities developing and practicing their capacities for self-conduct, both collectively and individually. It's about empowering people to sustain their challenge over time through continuous practice and resilience. And this idea of counter-discourse is central. It's about actively contesting and reshaping the dominant narratives that maintain social inequalities. Let's look at some interpretations of resistance, particularly in Foucauldian studies. These often limit resistance to what's called a border attitude or an operation at the margins. In other words, resistance is seen as something small and tactical, happening on the edges of power structures. This perspective tends to focus on minor displacements within the existing framework of domination and hegemonic ideologies. Now, Foucault's approach is interesting because it dissolves traditional distinctions like science and ideology into knowledge and discourse. While this offers a fresh perspective, it's argued that such a view can lead to a loss of any real critical edge. Basically, It might make us overlook the specific ways in which power functions, how it organizes submission, and weakens the dispositions needed for resistance. Because of that, critique shouldn't just be about tactical moves or small adjustments. Instead, it should aim at formulating a global alternative to the existing conditions. That means we need to think bigger, about transforming the entire system, rather than just making minor resistance within it. So, understanding the scope of resistance requires us to look at both the small tactical displacements and the larger structural changes we need to challenge and ultimately transform the conditions we're working within. Let's talk about the nature of critique in critical social analysis. Essentially, it involves two key components: normative critique and explanatory critique. Normative critique is about evaluating our current realities against core values like justice, asking whether things are fair, equitable, or morally right. Explanatory critique, on the other hand, aims to understand how these realities came to be, what historical, social, or economic factors shaped them. Both of these aspects are crucial because they help us not only see what's wrong, but also understand why it exists. This understanding is essential for meaningful change. Critical Discourse Analysis, or CDA, is a tool in this process. Its ultimate goal is to push us towards social emancipation, creating a society where domination and inequality are challenged and dismantled. CDA serves as a resource for struggle against domination. It provides insights and evidence that support activism and social movements seeking justice. Now, the dialectical relational approach, or DRA, is a particular method within CDA. It emphasizes dialectical reasoning, thinking in dynamic, interconnected ways, to link critique, explanation, and action. This approach helps us see how our critiques can lead to effective change. Finally, CDA contributes to public dialogue by opening up conversations about social problems. It encourages debate and awareness, making complex issues accessible and actionable. So, in summary, the nature of critique is about understanding and challenging social realities, using these insights to drive meaningful change and foster social justice. Let's take a closer look at how ideology is usually linked to the Marxist tradition, emphasizing its role in shaping social relations. In the sociocognitive approach, we see ideology not just as abstract ideas, but as a form of social cognition. This means it's rooted in the basic beliefs that members of a group hold, which then form the foundation of their shared social representations. Essentially, these ideologies are specific ways of depicting and constructing society, ways that often serve to reproduce existing power structures, including inequalities, domination, and exploitation. It's important to recognize that ideologies don't exist in a vacuum. They influence discourse, meaning the ways we communicate and interpret messages. Conversely, discourse also shapes how we develop, learn, or even change our ideologies over time. So there's a dynamic, ongoing interaction there. We also see that ideologies often emerge from conflicts within groups, struggles where one side's interests clash with another's. This process typically creates a us versus them dynamic, which fuels social and political tensions. Connecting this all back to our overall theme, understanding the relationship between discourse and ideology helps us see how ideas are not just personal, but deeply embedded in social power relations. Discourse becomes a tool that both reflects and reinforces these ideologies, making it a key area of focus when analyzing social dynamics. So on this slide, we're looking at how discursive conventions, or the ways we naturally communicate, often carry ideological assumptions. These are ideas that seem obvious or just common sense, but in reality, they reflect deeper beliefs or power structures. Ideologies tend to be embedded in features of discourse that we don't even question, because they become part of our taken-for-granted understanding of the world. The thing is, ideology is most effective when it's least visible, when it operates in the background without us noticing. When discourse promotes particular versions of reality or reinforces certain power relationships, we call that ideological. It's serving the interests of some groups over others, often maintaining existing inequalities. discursive practices can have powerful ideological effects. They shape how we see the world and how we position ourselves and others within it. For example, through language, certain groups might be portrayed as better or more deserving, while others are marginalized. One useful concept here is the ideological square. This structure emphasizes the good qualities of the in-group and the bad qualities of the out-group, or vice versa. It's a way language divides and simplifies complex social realities, often to reinforce stereotypes or biases. Overall, understanding how ideology operates in discourse helps us see beyond the surface of communication, uncovering the hidden ways language can uphold or challenge power dynamics and social inequalities. Naturalization is a powerful mechanism of power that often goes unnoticed. It's the process through which certain ideological assumptions lose their obvious, ideological character and become seen as just common sense. When we say something is naturalized, we mean it's become so familiar that it's no longer seen as a product of ideology, but rather as a neutral, unquestioned part of everyday life. This idea is often called the royal road to common sense, because once something is naturalized, people tend to accept it without critical questioning. As a result, these ideas are perceived as outside of ideology, simply the way things are, rather than reflections of underlying power structures. And here's the key point. Naturalization is one of the most formidable weapons in the arsenal of power. It helps maintain unequal power relations because it makes those inequalities seem normal or inevitable. This process isn't limited to ideas alone. It also happens with interactional routines, those conventional ways people interact in specific settings. For example, in medical consultations or interviews, certain interaction patterns become naturalized, which can reinforce existing power dynamics. Overall, understanding naturalization is crucial because it shows us how power operates subtly, making inequalities seem natural and unchangeable, which is a central theme in our discussion of ideology and power. Let's talk about ideology's function, which is often seen as shaping individuals into specific subjects. Now, the term subject actually has a double meaning. On one hand, it refers to someone who is subjected to authority, who submits to a higher power. On the other hand, it also describes someone who is self-confident and responsible for their own actions. What's interesting is that the social processes that produce these subject positions are learned and can vary a lot depending on the ideology in play. A key challenge for critical studies is understanding how people often willingly accept and submit to forms of domination that feel alienated or oppressive. This submission is usually experienced as a form of free choice and personal responsibility, which makes it even more complex. Now, institutions play a big role here. They shape us into subjects by imposing certain ideological constraints, and these constraints are often seen as common sense, things we accept as natural and non-ideological, even though they're deeply embedded in ideological processes. So, when we talk about the constitution of the subject, we're looking at how these social and ideological processes work together to produce individuals who see themselves as free and responsible, even when they might be under the influence of powerful, unseen forces. This is central to understanding how power and ideology operate in shaping our identities and social realities. Let's talk about hegemony, especially as it's understood in the Marxist tradition, like in Gramsci's work. Hegemony highlights the ideological aspect of social reproduction, meaning how society's ideas and beliefs help maintain social order. Now, an important point is that hegemony involves ruling by consent, not through coercion or force. This is where ideology comes in. It's the main mechanism that secures this consent, making discourse, or the way ideas are communicated, highly significant for social control. Hegemony is really a struggle, a contest where different political forces attempt to win widespread acceptance for their own ideas or discourses as the legitimate way to behave and organize society. The stakes in this struggle are quite high, controlling the shape of the political world, legitimizing policies, and ultimately sustaining the power relationships that benefit certain groups over others. So, understanding hegemony means recognizing how power isn't just maintained through force, but through winning people's minds and hearts, through ideology and discourse, making it a crucial concept in analyzing social and political dominance. There is a dual relationship between discourse and hegemony, which means that they are interconnected in two important ways. First, discourse often takes the form of hegemonic practice, which includes naturalized conventions, things that seem normal or obvious but are actually shaped by power. Second, this relationship also involves struggle, both in spoken and written interactions, as different groups contest these conventions. A key point here is that a major target of hegemonic struggle is the denaturalization of existing conventions. In other words, people challenge what is considered natural or normal and try to replace it with alternative ways of thinking or behaving. The outcomes of these struggles are crucial because they shape the structure of what we call orders of discourse, those frameworks that govern how we communicate and what is considered legitimate or authoritative. Another important aspect is the technologization of discourse. This is the process of using specific practices, like interviews or official forms, as interventions designed to construct a new form of hegemony within an institution. For example, the term counseling was originally therapeutic, focused on helping individuals. But now, it's often used as a hegemonic technique, meaning it's a tool to draw aspects of people's private lives into the domain of power, influencing how they think and behave. So, in essence, our relationship with hegemony is dual. It involves both the ongoing practices that reinforce certain norms and the struggles to transform those norms. And understanding this helps us see how discourse isn't just about communication. It's a site of power, contestation, and change within social structures.